recording? Thanks. All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you're calling in from today. And welcome to the launch of the Mind the Gap 3 report and Closing the Gap 3 policy paper. My name is Lauren Gherkin. I'm the INE Gender Coordinator, and I will be your moderator today as we launch these exciting new resources. Before we get started, I'd just like to go over a few quick housekeeping points. So for security reasons, your audio and video have been disabled, but you can still actively participate through the chat and Q&A functions. Please do submit questions in the Q&A throughout the webinar. We will do our best to save some time towards the end so that we can answer some of your questions. Closed captioning in English is available for this webinar. You can turn it on by clicking the CC icon at the bottom of your screen. And then finally, this session is being recorded, and the recording and the presentation slides will be shared on the INEE website and with all registrants by email. We highly encourage you to share this recording and the Mind the Gap resources with your friends and your colleagues. Next slide, please. So let's get started. We have some great speakers for you today, representing a range of organizations that were involved in developing these resources. We'll hear from them on key findings, gaps, and recommendations from the report and policy paper, as well as some reflections from our youth education advocates today. Next slide, please. But before we dive into the report findings, I'd like to hand over first to my colleague Zora Lakhani, the Senior Policy Analyst at Global Affairs Canada, for some opening remarks. Over to you, Zora.
Thank you, Lauren. Welcome, everyone. I'm really excited for us to be joining together today. I'd like to first acknowledge that I'm joining you today from the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, and express my gratitude for the opportunity to work and live on this land. My name is Zora Lakhani, Senior Policy Analyst at Global Affairs Canada, responsible for reporting data and evidence in education. I also work with the INEE to support initiatives focused on girls' education and EIE data and evidence. So that includes the fantastic Educate Us podcast that Lauren hosts, and I'm sure many of you have checked out, and the previous two Canada-funded Mind the Gap reports. I'm pleased to welcome you all today for the launch of the third in INEE's series of Mind the Gap reports. And this is a wonderful thing for us to celebrate because we're really excited that we're making this series happen. So really excited for Mind the Gap 3, equity and inclusion in and through girls' education in crisis. I would like to thank the INEE, the Interagency Network for Education Emergencies, Education Development Trust, who are the authors of this report, and the INEE Gender Working Group for their continued leadership for girls' education. I would like to congratulate the tireless efforts from youth advocates, educators, implementing partners, civil society organizations, and education ministries for the progress that has been made to date to ensure quality and inclusive education for all children and youth, particularly, and you'll see these thematic areas covered in the report, particularly around recruiting and retaining female teachers, supporting girls with disabilities, and ensuring gender responsive, inclusive education, and sexual and reproductive health and rights education in emergencies. And we see this progress in the findings from the Mind the Gap 3 report. Canada recognizes that gaps in provisions still remain in donor efforts to address barriers to education for children and youth, particularly for girls in conflict and crisis affected countries. This report highlights the need to strengthen the evidence base for girls' education in emergencies and meet the needs for aid focused on girls. Considering the number of emerging conflicts and the increasing prevalence of climate-related disasters, this is an important aspect. And I'll share the Mind the Gap 2 report on girls' education and climate change in the chat for your reference, use and dissemination. Reports such as this one are so important in ensuring global efforts are actually addressing the gaps and barriers faced by children and youth most impacted by conflict and crisis. And this report demonstrates the importance of data-informed decision-making around girls' education. And this is why Canada is committed to strengthening the data and evidence base for children in education and emergencies and protracted crises, particularly for girls, refugees, and host community children. We have continued our partnership with the INEE to strengthen data and evidence to inform policy and practice in education for children and youth affected by different forms of crises. And data informed also means focusing on the voices of those impacted. The Mind the Gap report increases the collective movement and awareness on girls' education, and it is imperative we listen to and learn from women and girls' experiences and advocate for their agency around education. This is why Canada, as part of its Together for Learning campaign, has established the Refugee Education Council. This council is made up of youth advocates, community leaders, teachers, parents who have lived experiences in crisis and conflict. And I'm pleased to say we will hear from a few of the members of the council today. And with that, I want to thank you all again for joining us today and encourage you to take this Mind the Gap 3 report and the other resources available through the INEE site and use them and share them and help them inform your work and decision making. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Zora, for that important context, and as always for plugging the podcast. Um, as you've said, given the number of emerging and ongoing crises and the increasing prevalence of climate-related disasters, it's really now more important than ever that we're prioritizing safe, inclusive, and quality education in emergencies, and especially for women and girls who we know are often the most marginalized. If you could go to the next slide, please. Hi, and the next, please. So as you can probably guess, Mind the Gap 3 and Closing the Gap 3 are the third edition of the Mind the Gap report and policy paper series, which is focused on girls' education in emergencies and protracted crises. The series aims to strengthen the evidence base for girls' EIE and to monitor progress towards gender equitable EIE in line with the Charlevoix Declaration on Quality Education. These resources were developed in collaboration with the INEE Gender Working Group, authored by a team from Education Development Trust, and graciously supported by Global Affairs Canada. Mind the Gap 3 summarizes progress, gaps, challenges, and opportunities in improving education and training for women and girls affected by conflict and crisis. It monitors progress since the second edition of the Mind the Gap report, and it highlights 3 new thematic areas that were prioritized by the INEE Gender Working Group. And those are recruiting and retaining female teachers, supporting girls with disabilities, and gender responsive inclusive education, and sexual and reproductive health and rights education in emergencies. The report is also accompanied by the Closing the Gap 3 policy paper, which summarizes key findings from the report and recommends actions for a range of stakeholders to address the gaps identified in the delivery, planning, funding, and monitoring of girls' education in emergencies. The policy paper is currently available in English and Portuguese, and French, Spanish, and Arabic are forthcoming. Next slide, please. So recognizing that our membership is made up of busy humanitarians, we're also developing summary briefs on each of the thematic areas. These briefs will provide concise overviews of key findings, gaps, and recommendations on each of the 3 thematic areas. The briefs on girls with disabilities and SRHR education are available now, and the brief on female teachers will be available in the next few weeks. We also have some blogs and podcast episodes in the works, so stay tuned for those too. Next slide, please. But without further ado, I'll hand over now to the Education Development Trust team, the co-authors of the Mind the Gap 3 report, Ella Page and Rachel Fitzpatrick, to share some of the findings from the report. Over to you.
Thank you, Lauren. Nice to be here. Yeah, this just overall, Sarah Holst couldn't be here today, but was one of the lead advisors for girls education and was a lead author on the report. And Ella and I will be presenting today. So next slide, please. So this has already been covered. I'll be very brief. The third Mind the Gap report, we look at progress in policy, data and financing for women and girls education in crisis and conflict areas. The three key themes have been mentioned multiple times about recruitment, retaining female teachers, girls with disabilities, inclusive education, and sexual and reproductive health and rights. And we look at the most recent data for girls' education in 44 crisis-affected countries. So the data that we have isn't always consistent for all data points across those 44 countries, but where we have data available for all 44, then we will compare against one another. Next slide, please. So summary of progress since Mind the Gap 2. So looking at commitments, progress continues in working towards girls being able to complete 12 years of safe, quality education. Some of the big areas of note in terms of commitments, political commitments and global commitments, relate to the Global Disability Summit, G7 commitments to gender transformative education, and the Transforming Education, the Freetown Manifesto for Gender Transformative Leadership, and the ECW and the GPE commitments to targeting gender strategic plan and gender equality. In terms of data, for Mind the Gap 2, there was a big period of strong data availability, and this was during a lot of COVID disruption. Since Mind the Gap 2, there have been less data releases. So the data presented in the current report has more gaps in terms of an update since the previous Mind the Gap. And also our understanding of the full impacts of COVID-19 are still to be determined, with data still coming out for these 44 countries. Since Mind the Gap 2, there has been GEMR have developed a more accurate out-of-school rate estimates, and they do this by combining household survey data with national administrative data. So there's links to that, and we can provide links to the methodology for that if anyone's interested. So we have drawn on that data. Next slide, please. So in terms of progress, again, so the total, in terms of the financial appeals, humanitarian appeal funding was close to $3 billion in 2022. You can see on the second bullet there that the proportion of funded appeals has reduced dramatically since 2018 and was about a quarter of appeals being funded by 2022. It's important to note this isn't necessarily a reduction in the actual amount of money that's going towards appeals. It's more of an increase in demand and the money available not being able to keep pace or not keeping pace with the increased demand for funding and the increased number of appeals. We particularly see the Ukraine crisis, for example, putting further strain on already limited funding. And in terms of learning, ECW estimate that the vast majority of children attending schools in countries covered by interagency plans and appeals are not learning. So we also calculated at the current rate of progress in terms of access to education and in terms of enrolment, net enrolment rates, we looked at how long it would take at that current rate for all girls in crisis settings to access school. 2090 is the conservative figure. That would be assuming that the rate of progress continues as it is. That number is heightened by countries with incredibly low enrolment rates, making gains up to the kind of 40-50% mark, but then stagnating. So the likelihood is you were looking at way beyond 2090 at the current rate for all girls to be in school. Looking there at the bottom right chart, as mentioned, this is the ECW data with estimates on the number of out-of-school girls in crisis-affected countries by level of education. So we see that primary combined 13.73 million, and then lower secondary and upper secondary together come to almost 24 million girls. So figures are quite staggering there when put together. Next slide, please. Okay, so another area is looking at recruiting and retaining female teachers. So overall, regardless of gender, there's a vast shortage of qualified teachers, with an acute shortage of female teachers at all levels of the system. We see at pre-primary that there's a greater proportion of female teachers. At primary, again, there's roughly 50% of the teacher workforce. But when we get into secondary and then tertiary education, the proportion of female teachers reduces dramatically. Some of the factors that are found to limit the number of women in teaching relate to difficult working conditions, policies that don't support families staying together, safety issues, and the proportion of women that have the correct qualifications in order to become a teacher and go to teacher training college. So next slide, and I think I might be handing over to my colleague Ella at this point.
Brilliant, thanks very much, Rachel. Hi everyone. So in terms of promising practices, in the report we highlight sort of several areas of interesting practice around recruiting and retaining female teachers, focused on recruitment, support and promotion. So access to ongoing, comprehensive, really high quality professional development for all teachers is really essential to building motivation, confidence and commitment to teaching through developing and expanding skills and knowledge in the classroom. And training for refugee teachers and pathways for these teachers to become nationally recognised teachers, really important as well. The COVID-19 pandemic brought many concerns around teacher wellbeing into focus, and many teacher surveys with elements on wellbeing were conducted during these periods of school closures and immediate period after reopening, which found that teachers really felt overwhelmed by the pandemic and experienced increased workloads, changing job requirements, and demands to make up lost instructional time as schools reopened. So it's really important that those challenges are being recognised and teachers are being supported to access psychosocial support for themselves, as well as supporting them to develop the skills to support learners in their classrooms. Another area we highlight is the importance of developing alternative roles and routes into teaching, which offer ways to increase the number of female educators and can also make positive impacts on access to education for girls, particularly in rural or remote areas. And training and support for female teachers in specialist roles can also play a part in creating safer learning environments for girls and for all students in the school. So we see initiatives like teaching teams, the recruitment of teaching assistants and other community educators as a really promising way of moving more women into the teaching workforce and increasing that number of female educators. There's some really good examples of programmes that do this in a number of different ways in the report and in the case studies. So one model might be recruiting local young women to become learning assistants, working at local primary schools, and also providing them with access to other education and learning while they're in that role, and supporting them to then apply to teacher training college or to access other educational and employment opportunities. And it's really important when we're thinking about designing this kind of programme that we're thinking about how to remove barriers, for example, through paying stipends during training and salaries once people are hired into this kind of role. So, sorry, we have the next slide, please. So the next chapter deals with girls with disabilities and inclusive education. So this chapter looks at data and evidence to inform support for girls with disabilities, as well as access to and completion of basic education in comparison to their peers without disabilities, and also includes looking at the provision of inclusive education infrastructure, as well as efforts being made to integrate inclusive education. So we know that girls with disabilities face multiple and intersecting barriers to both access to school and learning, as many as 33 million children with disabilities and LMICs are not in school, and children with disabilities are really uniquely vulnerable to being denied an education when their support systems are affected by crisis and conflict. And you can see some of this data here. We haven't got much time left, so let's skip on to the next slide and some of the strategies and actions that are being taken around effective inclusion. Again, there's some really powerful case studies in the report. So we highlight kind of accessibility of school infrastructure and classroom environments, to make sure that they're accessible to everybody, but the current data doesn't really provide the information that you need to be able to systematically say whether the adaptations being made in school environments are actually really meeting the needs of learners in their communities. And we know, of course, that infrastructure and devices are just one part of creating an inclusive environment in the school. We also need to tackle negative attitudes towards teaching and views of the ability to learn of children with disabilities, both within teachers and in the community. So here again, really high quality professional development is really important. And one way of providing this is with an itinerant or roving teacher with really specialised skills who can provide ongoing support and training to teachers within mainstream schools to enable them to feel confident and capable to deal with the individual learners and work with the individual learners in their classroom and their particular needs. So if we go on to the next slide even, which is about the next chapter. Thanks.
Ella, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry, don't know how that happened. Thanks, Lauren. So this chapter reviews SRHR information and education in emergencies, with a focus on the development and delivery of comprehensive and inclusive sexuality education in crisis settings for both in-school and out-of-school children. And you can see some of the data here and the lack of curricula in place in both in-school and out-of-school settings. And as well, where there are curricula in place, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're being taught and implemented, both due to resistance within communities and teachers' own discomfort, perhaps, with some of the topics that may be in those curricula. So if we move on to the next slide. So here are some of the strategies that we highlight in the report for SRHR education in emergencies. So we know that men and boys have often been absent from SRHR discussions, and yet SRHR education can really start to address those harmful male gender norms that discourage help-seeking and even seeking behaviours, and promote sexual dominance, and it can have benefits for both men and women in that way. We know that gaining community support and overcoming resistance is also key. So successful programming in Pakistan, for example, spent time understanding the really nuanced context within communities and developing a programme in a way that recognised really deep-rooted societal and cultural barriers to sexuality education at the planning stage. And also, of course, youth are a really vital role as advocates for SRHR and should be key to the development of any curriculum. And then to ensure a fully inclusive curriculum, girls with disabilities should also be engaged in that consultation process to ensure that their needs are addressed and the materials develop challenge discriminatory norms. One example I'll just highlight here is from Lebanon, which demonstrates the involvement of youth and also the way that technology platforms can be used. So they train Syrian refugee adolescents and youth, as well as young people from their host community, on SRHR content, made videos with and for young people, posted them on Facebook so that youth could watch and engage with them when they had time and privacy to do so, really widening the audience and the engagement and making sure that materials are contextually relevant as well. So yeah, that's our very brief overview of the report itself. I'd encourage you to have a look at the case studies in the report. There's some really amazing organisations that we've highlighted in there. And hand over back to you, Lauren.
Thanks so much, Ella and Rachel, for that helpful overview. I'm sure there will be lots of questions later about the findings you've highlighted. As a reminder to our audience, if you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A function. We'll do our best to answer them after the presentations. Maria, if you wouldn't mind stopping screen sharing for a moment. So before we jump into the recommendations from the report, we're going to take a super quick break. And we're going to hear from one of the wonderful youth advocates that we have joining us today, because I know she needs to jump off soon. So Niabal Bielgang is a member of the Refugee Education Council, as Zora mentioned earlier. That's a group of education advocates convened by World Vision, SIPWIG, and Global Affairs Canada. We're very lucky to have her with us today, and she's going to share some reflections on girls' education and why education is important to her. So Niabal, if you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself and turning on your video.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone that is joining us everywhere across the globe. I hope I'm loud enough. Lauren, can you confirm that?
Yeah, you sound great.
Okay, thank you. So like Lauren said, my name is Nabal. I'm a member of the Refugee Education Council. Just to give you a background, I lived in Kakuma refugee camp for the last 20 years, and I moved to Canada about a year ago, and now I'm at Carleton University. I'm a student here. Why is education important? First of all, education is a human right. So whether displaced or refugee children are displaced or not, it's their universal right. Just because they are displaced, it doesn't mean that they should not get the education they deserve. Personally, education is important to me because it has given me the skill set, the growth that I need, either in my professional or personal life. How does education impact my life? I would say a very good example is moving out here to Canada and having to transition from a refugee lifestyle to a Canadian lifestyle. First of all, English is not my first language, so I learned English at school. So one skill that education has helped me is communication skills. How do I communicate with the rest of the world? One thing. Also at my professional level, how do I relate with everyone at work? How to do my job? Those are skills that you can only get in school. So I think education is important, and it has different way it impacts our life in different ways and different aspects. My advice to the policymakers or anyone, any stakeholder that is tasked or has the responsibility to make policies on behalf of displaced and refugee youth is there's nothing for refugees or displaced youth without their voice. So in everything that you do, please try to incorporate their voices or try to hear their perspective, because they are the one with lived experience. And so they should be the one to give out solutions. And there is no way you can give solutions without having the experience or having the lived experience. So the best thing is listen to those voices, listen to the girls and women, and let them make the decisions and the solutions they see fit for them. Thank you so much, Lauren. And yes, I'm jumping up to a next meeting.
Thank you so much, Niabal. I always so enjoy hearing from you. Thank you for sharing those really important points. Maria, would you mind screen sharing again? So I'm going to hand over now, next slide, please. I'm going to hand over now to Ellen Chigwanda, the Education Advocacy Advisor for CARE and the co-chair of INEE's Gender Working Group. Ellen's going to share with us some of the recommendations coming out of the Closing the Gap 3 policy paper. Over to you, Ellen. And next slide, please.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Hi, everyone. It's part of this event and very excited that we are launching this report today. Maybe let me start by saying that, as you can imagine, we have quite a number of recommendations coming through from the report, but what we will do in this presentation is to share just a few recommendations, and these have been kindly organized by our authors according to stakeholder or influencer. So we have recommendations for national governments of crisis-affected countries. We also have recommendations for bilateral and multilateral donors, for civil society, for data collectors and collators, and then also recommendations for teachers and other education personnel. So I'll start us off with recommendations for governments. One of the recommendations that is in the report is for governments to create alternative pathways into teaching and education leadership for those who have not had the necessary level of schooling. And this includes, special interest groups such as women, as well as people with disabilities. Another recommendation is around ensuring access to high quality teacher professional development on disability, inclusive education, and delivering comprehensive sexuality education curricula. And lastly, to coordinate across sectors to identify SRHR needs and to ensure that the rollout of comprehensive sexuality education curricula takes into account over age and out of school learners. As I mentioned, there are other recommendations that have been included in the report itself. Notably, maybe I could also talk about the fact that the report also recommends that governments, considers adjusting the gender balance within the teacher workforce. So, for example, bringing in more men in the early years and primary level teaching, bringing in more women into leadership positions by providing support for women to relocate and other incentives, and also another recommendation around establishing education in emergencies units in national teacher service commissions or the equivalent. And then moving on to bilateral and multilateral donors, so recommendations around supporting governments in addressing the gender balance within the teaching workforce and prioritizing funding initiatives that support female teachers, safety, and progression. Also, a recommendation to increase funding to support the safety and learning of girls with disabilities and girls facing multiple forms of discrimination, as well as to support the development and delivery of age-appropriate CSE and CSE delivered at primary and secondary level. Some recommendations for civil society to advocate for teachers' pre-qualification requirements to include training on gender equality and inclusion. Also to support schools and communities to identify children with disabilities and ensure schools have resources and capacity to support individual learners. And lastly, to engage with parents and religious leaders to address resistance to comprehensive sexuality education. Next slide, please. So I think the key message with collectors and collators of data is that girls are not a homogeneous group. By treating girls as a homogeneous group, research and evidence tends to mask some of the intersectionality pieces such as gender, age, and other considerations. So that's like the key message that's coming through from the Closing the Gap 3 policy paper. So recommendations for this group of influencers is to ensure that data on teachers in refugee settings is comprehensive, sex disaggregated, and includes information on teachers with disabilities. Also to support governments and implementers to use the Washington Group of Questions disaggregate data by sex, and to integrate responses into nationwide data. And finally, to ensure women's and girls' voices and lived experiences are prioritized and complement quantitative data. Lastly, there are recommendations for teachers and educational personnel to advocate for ongoing gender and disability inclusive education training, to work with parents and caregivers to understand how the safety and learning of their children with disabilities is being prioritized in the classroom. And lastly, to continuously build their knowledge on SRHR and put into practice and advocate for ongoing teacher professional development on delivering comprehensive sexuality education curricula. As I mentioned earlier, these are really just a summary of the recommendations. I would really encourage you to look at the policy paper and see the full range of recommendations that have been directed at these different groups of influencers. Thank you so much, and over back to you, Lauren.
Thanks, Ellen. It's exciting to hear the different ways that different types of stakeholders can tackle some of the challenges that we've raised today. As you said, I would highly recommend that you all take a look at the policy paper and see how you can integrate some of these recommendations into your work. We'd also love to hear from all of you on how or whether these recommendations are useful to you. But finally, next slide, please. Finally, I'm very excited to introduce our last round of speakers. We've spoken a lot today about young women and girls affected by crisis, but I think it's past time that we listen to them, make sure that they have space to share their own experiences and their own priorities around education and what they would like to see change. We've already heard from Niabal, but we are also joined by two other members of the Refugee Education Council, Riam Majid and Katira Amin. We will start first with Riam. Next slide, please. So Riam unfortunately wasn't able to join us live today, but she has shared some recorded remarks. So if you wouldn't mind starting that video, thanks.
I believe education is a powerful weapon, particularly for girls, enabling them to navigate over life challenges, while serving as a key for making the life of their dreams. My journey marked by more than 6 years without higher education, as I was a refugee, and I saw myself among peers who were not able to get their education. I determined to assist other girls in getting the education that they rightfully deserve. It is a must to foster an inclusive environment globally. One of the most important priorities should be the education of girls, underscoring its essential nature. Policymakers are urged to quickly develop and implement policies and strategies, facilitating girls' access to education and the realization of their rights. I hope to convey a broader impact of this situation, not just on girls' education and future, but also on their long-term mental well-being. It is crucial to recognize and understand the consequences expanding beyond individuals. Communities are profoundly shaped by the education of girls, as they consult half of the society. In my perspective, the overall well-being of our entire society is compromised when girls are lacking education, because the girls are part of the workforce, schools, and everywhere. Therefore, it is important once again to focus on girls' education.
Thanks, Riam. Maria, if you wouldn't mind stopping screen sharing again, we're going to hand over to our final speaker, Katira. Do you mind unmuting yourself? We would love to hear from you.
Yes. Hi everyone, my name is Hatira Amin. I am an Afghan refugee currently living in Karachi, Pakistan. I'm a member of Refugee Education Council, where we are helped by the Government of Canada for the educational gap of refugees, especially for girls. Why education is important for me is one of the most important thing that I really want to share is because my religion tells me that it is obligatory for both men and women to get education. Like it's something which is obligation on both men and women to seek education from cradle to grave. Like it's something that you have to do that. The second most important thing why education was and is was important very for me and is important for every girl is the dream which I have seen is now I'm living. I share it with a lot of my friends and even with my parents that there was a time when I used to dream of having a job because we were suffering financially as we were living in a refugee camp in Karachi and we were facing a lot of financial problem and there was a lot of problem that I could not my family my parents could not even afford my education and my siblings education. So there was a dream of mine that yes, I want to get education. I want to support my own education. I want to support my siblings' education, my parents' education. So right now, I am having that job. I am working in an organization where I'm getting paid just for my education, because I have never give up on my education. Let me tell you that for a refugee living in a refugee camp, it's never easy to get education because you have problem because you don't have the identity card, you don't have legal documentation, you don't have all those resources all those resources like financial resources, document resources that normally a student can have to get education. So that is why it was always important for me to get education. The second thing, it was because my father is the biggest support over my education. He never had a chance to complete his education and he has seen a lot of difficulties in his life, and he always tells us that education is the only way that you can have a better future. There are two-person. I have seen a person in our society who has his children and who does not want his children to go to school because according to him he is working, he is earning money with that education, well his children. So the only difference that my father and I all have also have said to them that you are working as a vegetable seller, your son will also do the same job and your future generation will do the same thing if you do not go for education. While as if my father is a vegetable seller or doing some manual work, if I'm educated, I will not do the same work. I will go for a good job. For a good job, will have a better future, and also it's not only that I got my education, my completed my education is better for me. I have done this. I have good communication skill, and then I have went over to advocating for the challenges that all the refugees are facing in this country which I'm living. So it's not only education. My education has not only helped for me, but also my fellow refugees. I'm working for them, working hard for them. The challenges that I have seen, I never want the same challenges to be faced by them. And what I want the stakeholders and international NGOs do for refugees and especially for girls' education is one of the most important why I have seen in the place where I'm living, almost 90% of girls and boys, both of them, are out of higher education, and the reason is they don't have the documentation to get admissions. We have a lot of refugees who have been in refugee camps, who have studied in refugee schools, and they have documentation of the refugee school which is not acceptable by the local universities. So that is why they are out of higher education. And I request the international community and NGOs to work mostly on how we can admit refugee students for higher education. We had this aim of 15 by 30. That means that 15% of refugees should go for higher education by 2030. And that can only be possible if these students or refugees are given the chance to get admission for higher education. We have a lot of students who have desire to go for higher education, but the only thing that is stopping them is because they are not getting admission. They're not being accepted by universities due to their not having documentation of or required documentation. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much, Katira. We have a little bit of time now for some Q&A. If the panelists wouldn't mind coming back on video. While we're doing that, just a quick plug for another INEE resource. If you're interested in hearing more from Riam and Katira and Niabul, I would really urge you to check out the Educate Us podcast. We've been really lucky to have them each join us for an episode. So a few questions from our participants today. The first question is around CSE and the reasons why communities resist CSE. I think this is a question for Ellen, but I'll give it to Ella and Rachel as well if you want to come in on how we can address resistance to comprehensive sexuality education and support teachers to deliver it in a culturally appropriate way. Over to you, Ellen or Ella or Rachel, whoever wants to come in first. Don't be shy.
Shall I come in? I think.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question and kind of difficult to answer as well. I think these factors are really contextually specific and yeah, really need that sort of contextual depth and engagement to engage and address concerns in particular communities. So I think it's important to remember as well that CSE is really providing knowledge to children, young people around skills, values and attitudes to enable them to make informed decisions about their own sexual health and well-being, and that, you know, that's a positive thing. So I think there are lots of examples in the report of programs that are really engaging with communities in that planning stage, understanding what the concerns are, where they're coming from, the cultural norms, cultural attitudes and beliefs, religious norms, attitudes and beliefs that are influencing resistance to CSE, and finding ways to address those within the programming and work that they're doing. And that often looks like engaging with men and boys and bringing them on board in SRHR programming and leading that change, and really engaging with young people and youth advocates and bringing them on board to express why they need this information, why it's important to them, and leading that kind of change and discussion within their own communities as well. So I think it's a really important question and a really important thing for people to be, you know, for considering as you're developing these programs. And yeah, like I said, there's some good examples of people who have been able to do that in the report.
Thanks for bringing it back to the report. Any other responses from any of the other panelists?
Maybe just to say briefly from my own sort of experience of implementing education programs, I think, you know, a number of stakeholders worry more about the outcome of providing CSE. So for a lot of parents, their concern is, you know, once children have the information, what will they do with it? So I think the issue is really to have probably a whole community approach to CSE, where the focus is not really just on delivering content for the learners, but also thinking about ways in which we can educate parents and other stakeholders and influencers about why it's important, why is CSE important. I think that's where it needs to start, actually. Why is it important? How will it help their children? what is the sort of long-term, development gains for households, for communities, for the country to deliver this curriculum. And I think once, it's almost like when you go to the doctor with a child, you have to treat the mother first, right? And, once you treat the mother psychologically, then, the child is more likely to make it through all of that. So it's the same thing here where we are saying, once the parents, the influencers, and sometimes even educators themselves and education officials, there needs to be a conversation at that level that then helps to create a conducive ecosystem for learners to receive and for teachers to deliver CSE.
That makes a lot of sense, taking a more holistic approach and making sure that everyone is comfortable with the content or understands what information is being shared. Thank you. Do you want to come in, Rachel, or would you like me to move on to the next question? Great. So the next question then is for the EDT team around the reduction in data since COVID-19. If you were able to expand on that a little bit, whether that's something that you're seeing across the board or if it's something that seems to be more regional. I think folks would be interested in knowing more about data availability on girls' education.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. So it was across the board at the time we were collecting the data for this report. So just to bear in mind as well that we had a cutoff point maybe about 5 or so months ago in terms of the data that's included in the report, and there has been some data released since. So hopefully in future iterations there will be more updated data for us to go from where we can look at the impacts of COVID-19. But we found we really struggled this time with getting up-to-date data, and it was more about us then looking at, are there any data sources where we think there's been new and more accurate ways of estimating different data points, such as out-of-school children, which is where the ECW came in, and also GEMR's approach to estimate the number of out-of-school children as well. So, but for us, it was broad and across, and it did take a bit more than usual. Like we might be able to download from UIS, UNESCO's data source, to look at database, to look at consistent data from EMIS, for example, and other sources. But it was just a struggle across the board this time, across all regions. And we've found, kind of personally working with some governments in terms of why this might be, with the whole back to school learning loss emphasis since COVID-19, we found that some of the more basic EMIS size have slipped, and the more basic kind of data collection and then submission have slipped. And there's just been a lot more budget and focus on like the more learning loss metrics, but not necessarily publishing those as well. So there's still there's the transparency issue as well since COVID-19, I think. So some of it's difficulty in gathering the data since then, with not all children coming back to school, not all governments perhaps wanting to immediately look at their enrolment numbers straight away because there's a staggered return to school and they don't want it to look too bleak. So there seems to be quite a lot of factors in why there's been a slower data release than there normally would be. But as I said, if you look at the past 6 months since when we did that data capture and we downloaded that data, there has been more data coming through since then.
Thanks, Rachel. Ella, anything you want to come in with? Nope. All right. Very quickly, one last question for anyone who wants to answer it. There's a question around recommendations around targeting youth or youth-led groups around education in the report. So anyone want to quickly respond to that? No? All right. Well, off the top of my head, there were quite a few recommendations around targeting youth or youth-led groups around informing comprehensive sexuality education curricula and around delivering it in a way that's going to be appropriate, but also engaging and understandable and using sort of the right language at that age group. But I think those were the majority, excuse me, of the recommendations around youth-led groups, around specifically implementing some of those curricula and making sure that they were relevant. All right. So it seems like we're coming to the very end of our time. So I want to send a quick thank you to all of our wonderful speakers and to everyone who joined us today. We really appreciate you taking the time to learn about the Mind the Gap 3 report and the Closing the Gap 3 policy paper and trends in girls' education and protracted crises more broadly. Please do check out those resources on our website. And if you're interested in learning more about any of the thematic areas that we've addressed in this report, please keep an eye out for future gender working group webinars. We'll be doing an event series to delve deeper into these topics and into some of the case studies in the report. If you'd like to stay up to date, I would highly recommend that you subscribe to our INEE's gender newsletter for more information. We send out regular updates on events and resources related to gender responsive education in emergencies. And as always, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me at girlseducation@inee.org. Thank you so much for joining, and I look forward to hearing from you all. Thanks, everybody. Bye.